Alrighty. Victory Games Civil War. Now, it's not going to be, yeah, the hat is missing the brim. Basketball took it off. I lost it dancing. I still have the brim, I just can't glue it on. This is a classic. I mean, there's no question. You go online, you either at Consim World or at Board Game Geek, and very few people, if any, have anything bad to say about this game. There is no doubt that this is one of those must-haves in any collection that spans any scope of the wargaming hobby. If you have any interest in the Civil War, this one belongs on your shelf. But let's discuss it a little bit. Now, I love the game. When I first bought it, just looking at the map, and everything's a little tired and faded and older. The colors, though, were so perfect. The design on it was so perfect. The counters, the only problem with them, a little glossy. This is one of almost no games that I own do I keep sorted in a tray. This is one of the very few. Not that there's all that many counters, not that I can't sort it. Somehow it just deserves it in a way that nothing else does. The counters have a gloss on them now. And that's one of the difficulties. This is, almost an exemplary Victory Games game. One of the difficulties with Victory Games is that the glossy counters, if you play a game a lot, and I played this, not as much as some people do, but there are a few of my counters that are just worn out because of that gloss on them. They don't last as long as the old SPI matte counters do. But other than that, component-wise, this is just gorgeous. The map is just so beautiful. I can remember opening this up, setting it up, and it was like just a wonderful experience. The first time I had such an experience was with the old Third Reich, but this just blows that away in terms of the graphical design of the board and just being able to see everything. Look at the videos of the playthrough if you want to see the whole thing spread out. Player aid chart, again, most companies, most games weren't coming out with that much in this way. Other companies nowadays, these have become almost de rigueur. Anything that's going to have sort of different types of ways of handling things. So this has a combat system that's really, I think, unique to this game. I don't know if I've even seen it picked up from somewhere else. It's an odds chart, but one that's modified by the size of the forces involved. And that's actually really clever because I've seen ones where there are combat result charts that are different for different sizes. Here it's integrated into one chart. And that may be the big difference here. I find this particularly easy to understand, to scan and see what kind of force I want to have, because often you have the option to bring in a reinforcement and boost your size, from a smaller medium force up a level. The actual effects of combat, all very, very simple. Once you get used to kind of the way the rules work, the modifiers for the leaders, the modifiers for terrain and everything, there just aren't that many different things, and they aren't that different. There's a few things like, the swamps, the fortresses, the navigable rivers, the gap road, that are more, they're two shifts instead of one, and other terrain is all one. It's all very, very easy. You don't have to look things up. You hardly ever have to do anything except roll the dice and cross-reference on here for the ground combat. There's extra things like the combat ratio chart. You may want to glance at them a couple of times if you're not sure, but really the odds work exactly as you'd expect odds to work in every other game. The command table you have to look at every turn, more than once a turn quite often. Leader loss table, you end up memorizing those after a playing or so. The other charts inside are much, much less used. The naval combat results. Naval action is weird in this game in the sense that I think For the People had the same kind of situation where you don't use it very often, but you got to kind of be aware of it all the time. It's this constant threat, and it's necessary for the Union. There's no question of that. And it's necessary for the Confederates to be aware of it. But most of the turns probably go by without a lot of naval operations handling them. We got the Western stuff over here, which is reprinted on the map. If you're playing with the Western expansion, this is just an extra little... maybe this space could have been used for something more valuable, like, I don't know, victory point targets or something. I have no idea. Terrain effects chart. Weird situation here. Almost nothing costs extra movement, okay? That makes this really odd. So you almost never actually look at the terrain effects chart either. There are special cases in here, but very quickly you realize that for the most part you can understand this without having to read it. So a lot of these charts are maybe not all that necessary, but having them in chart form probably makes it easier to memorize them, certainly compared to paging through the rules and having to get it. And that's, again, this is one of the earlier games that you see this. Classic Victory Games rule book, 2 columns on each page. All of them are rules, although there are little italicized segments. Really well written. Wonderful read. Not as good a reference as an SPI rulebook. The Victory Games ones never are, but in terms of just like memorizing exactly where things are, although they get pretty... This one, I've played this enough that it... But you've got a nice index in here, which is something you wouldn't see in the SPI games. Of course, you also have a lot of pages. It's 56 pages, so it takes a little bit of effort there. The command point chart cost. That would be something that would be useful to have on here. Again, though, it's something that you pretty much memorize right away. All right. What about the game itself? Well, the pulsed movement system, first of all, there were very few games that had this before Victory Games came along. They introduced a lot of games with this sort of interactive pulsed movements. Some of them worked... They all were very clever idea, but some of them work better than others. This one works fantastically well. It even carries over very well Solitaire in a way that, I don't know, things like Vietnam and Korean War maybe not quite so much. I feel like with this one, you roll the dice, both players get a pile of actions, and then, hey, it's time to go away and go do something. Come back. And, it's like you play for 5 minutes, and then you go away for 20, and then you come back and play for 5. That's how I like doing this, but it works very well opposed to. You roll off, the other person gets a couple of things he can do, and then you get a couple of things you can do, and then you roll off again. You never know when the turn's going to end. It could happen at any time. It looks like it's going to end, and then it could get extended longer. All very nice little mechanisms in there to prevent you from being able to, have too much knowledge about how you want things to work out at the end of play. Let's see what else we got here. The command point operations, again, a nice little, sort of this precursor to what you see with the ops points in the CDGs. You can really see that line of development, once you start saying, okay, well now Civil War was a fantastic game, everybody loved it. How can I capture that on cards? Because cards are kind of cool, I can put historical stuff. You can see that development along that line here. The most brilliant thing, the thing that struck me the most about this game, and it's not the thing that carried on to everything else, like the ops points, the pulsed movement, all that kind of feel has really become very popular recently. What didn't, and what struck me as the most impressive thing, was the leaders. Yeah. Freddy the Great had leaders, right? Yeah. But this was a game where you had leaders on the board who started out at a certain rank and worked their way up and met historical, you know, values as they improved or got worse or whatever as their commands got bigger. So you have, so that brings into line one thing right away, which is the debates over the leader values. You know, is Albert Sidney Johnson, you know, does he deserve to have the rating he has? Should he have something great because Jeff Davis thought he was great, but he got himself killed in his first battle? Well, he didn't do a lot. I mean, he really sat on his ass for a long time. In fact, it's kind of a weird situation because you almost feel like you want kind of a special rule for him, like you would have in Republic of Rome for Pompey, where, yeah, he's really, really inactive most of the time, but every now and then he just gets up and, you know, does impressively incredible things. And essentially that's the thing. The one battle that he got himself killed in, you know, he managed to arrange this, not well perhaps, but essentially a surprise attack on Garand. He caught him with his pants down. He coordinated two armies together. Really, really more impressive than most of the generals in that era were doing. But the net effect wasn't very good, and it was somewhat chaotic. So throw it up as a toss-up. Other people, you know, Hood. Does Hood deserve such good ratings early on, or was he always kind of a crappy general with good men? Well, it doesn't matter. Hey, the men are included in the general the same way the Cav commander creates a Cav unit. Okay, so like Hood's Texans may be what it means to be Hood at 1 star. It creates this tremendous attrition rate on the Confederate generals that feels so right because they have fewer men who make it to that 3 stars. And they have a lot of 1 star good leaders who then are going to become less valuable later on anyway. But what does it miss? It misses all the might have beens. You know, Cleburne stuck at 1 star. They had a couple. They had the Jackson Lion special rules. But there are so many people, Cleburne, Breckinridge, just who maybe would have had an opportunity had they been in the right place at the right time. And the game kind of tries to convince you not to put them in the right place at the right time because they're kind of wasted. You don't really want Breckinridge traipsing along with an army. But it's not worth removing him from one. It's not worth spending, you know, actions to ship him across the country if you got somebody else closer or whatever. So there are aspects of the leadership rule that definitely leave this sort of desire for more. And Lincoln and Davis did not know what they had for leaders. They didn't have the ratings in front of them. So you have this foreknowledge of your leaders, and you have this gamey aspects. For example, with the Union. Someone pointed out recently in a strategy article, and I completely agree with this. You want to get your Union commanders into battle, even your kind of mediocre ones, and you want to get your fights going. You want to lose fights if need be to get your promotions into play. Your mindset, the reasons that you're doing things aren't really the reasons the Union commanders were moving and doing what they were doing. But it does actually create this impetus in a way that seems integral to the game to make these actions that are a little different. So I take a little bit more respect for it as a game now, thinking more along those lines, which I never used to very much, than as a simulation of the mindset of Lincoln or Davis. Okay, but when you add something like this leader system, a mind like mine and many, many others from all the expansions that are out there, ones with a little bit more follow through, homemade little leader variants and stuff, make it very clear everybody was kind of grasping for, yeah, but I want. And so that's one of the kind of flaws in the game, is the design doesn't just nail it down. It nails down the idea. It gives you this brilliant start, but I think many, many people, and certainly myself, looked at it and said, oh, just a little bit more. And for me, what's that little bit more? Maybe completely random leaders. I see one that's like that. But that's got to be done very well. Promotions based on how well you did. As well as promotions, as well as values rated on that. You know, I mean, McClellan did some kind of nice stuff in West Virginia, gets his promotion to the Army Command. Well, the game will kind of draw him that way, but it's not because he wins. He could lose and he'll still be overrated for what he did on the board. And those kind of things kind of make me feel a little bit like, that's not quite right. This isn't the simulation. It's just trying to match history. So those things kind of disturb me. There's people like Fremont and Halleck who are kicking around, who never really commanded troops in the field. I think Fremont actually did. No. Fremont got in trouble because he wrote an Emancipation Proclamation of his own. These guys are really actually theater commanders more than anything else. And there's no role for that. And after seeing, say, Vietnam, I kind of want something like the Corps commanders in Vietnam sitting over the theaters. For the People didn't cover all the issues, but it did feel like it integrated the leaders a little bit better, avoided some of the traps that this game has. I still prefer this one as an overall. Probably just my bias against the point-to-point and CDGs and everything. I think, and it may just be my tremendous familiarity with this. I've got to play, I have only played it once, I've got to play For the People again. There's no question. I love this subject, and my copy's cleaner, so it's more attractive. At least the counters are. Controlling the supply lines in this is so important. It's like a lot of hex games get a lot of things really wrong. This one usually doesn't feel like it does get things wrong. Now, the game I played this time with little circling armies running around chasing each other, that felt weird. In fact, the whole game that I played this time is the weirdest playthrough that I've ever done of this game. It's felt the most wrong out of all of them. Yet it was still a lot of fun. And strangely, it still got me to the same place. In fact, I think the Union did better in this with all their setbacks, but that's more for the discussion in the playthrough. There's the, hey, if the Confederates grab Washington, maybe the European powers get involved. That sort of sudden death thing, to put that as an importance. Because otherwise, players would not give Washington the importance it deserves. And honestly, a Union player who loses to Washington deserves to lose the game. Even if you don't buy into that France or Britain would recognize the Confederacy. Let's see what else we got here. The hidden leaders, the hidden strength points. I like strength point games. There's a certain bias in my head about them. So, for example, looking at their Weltkrieg, I said, well, it would be a lot easier with a strength point game, but would it feel as right? Isn't it better to have the historical units on the board and everything? But, when it comes down to it, for ease of play, I would rather see the strength points and just say, this is an abstraction. You can pretend your units are there, your specifics. It doesn't add that much to the actual gameplay. But for some people, knowing the specific units is important. That's something you lose with this, no question, and with For the People. I've already talked enough about the combat system. The armies. Armies are so vital because they give you this reactive capability. okay, and they give you the ability to pull reinforcements in. I don't know how much any of that really makes sense, except what else do you give to the army? So again, it's kind of this, there's a lot of situations in this game where I feel like the history's kind of been pushed aside a little bit in favor of, yeah, we got this all to work really perfectly as a game. We tinkered and tweaked this, that, and the other, and it works really well that way. And I think, that's one of the things. It felt really, really historical to me when I didn't know too much about it. But as I've more and more, thought about the history in comparison to the game and played this enough times, more and more little things come out against me. I love the game. It's just there is no perfect game, right? The demoralization, the effects of supply, limited. But again, this is how what I'm saying. Very few hex games really nail it down. I feel like this one really does nail it down in a way where it's no continuous front. So many times things are just too loose in a hex-based game, and that's one of the things that I think people like about the point-to-point. I'd prefer areas if you're going to do that, just because of the visual aspect. But having a hex game, boy, you really get to see where the armies are and understand, what kind of positioning you have and what you have to do to swerve around, and it's just great. Naval rules. Hey, I can't speak too much about naval rules because I never really learned them. I play them, and I think I do okay with them, but I'm constantly having to look them up when I use them. These are, somebody asked about this, these are about equivalent, I think, oh no, someone else, Romaine Duchess. These are about equivalent in size to what For the People has, and maybe a little longer. It's easier with the hexes, but there's something weird there because you're moving along hex sides. Games that start adding stuff like that becomes kind of a little odd there. The biggie, though, is the Union can pretty much block up and any rivers they like. They can travel as far as they like along rivers. They can do what they like with the water. And it's really up to the Confederates to put some little impediments in their way. And you can see those impediments were enough to keep the Mississippi River all game in my game. Supply rolls again. Reinforcements. This was one of my big gripes, right? During the playthrough, the reinforcements, the Confederate, if they're doing well, don't get to keep at least part of the reinforcements they probably would be able to be putting on the field. You don't pay enough price for losing territory in this game. You will face the historical manpower limitations no matter how well you do. You don't get extra manpower for, grabbing Missouri, right? That seems wrong for grabbing West Virginia, Kentucky. The limitations on the armies, you can see they don't really affect much because you can only build them in one place, but you can ship them out elsewhere. I think, maybe I cheated there, right? But I don't think so. I think it's just where they're, after creation you can move them out of their area. So I didn't cheat there. Control of territory through the forts, the fortresses, especially the river territory. Cav, Cav never plays the role that I think it should in it. It gets parked in an army and gives you a bonus for the reaction roll, but I very seldomly see raiding forces being broken off. If the Confederates no longer have a field army, though, in the West, it does start happening. The problem is, by the time it does, they don't have reinforcements to create their cav out of. And usually whatever strength points they have are somewhere important, doing something already. It's hard, for me at least, to split off a cav unit when they can't really control victory points as easily. They cost extra movement points. They cost extra movement points to take rails too, right? However, no, they can't take enemy territory cities. So, yeah, they can only raid within their own territory. And like I said, the Union usually is pretty heavily stymied. The territorial conversion rules, the initial three border states being able to grab them. I like this kind of stuff, but that's happened before. I think even A House Divided had that. The victory conditions. Okay. So, I've always found all of them easy to get, except for the Grand Campaign for the Union. Everything up to, including the election, I can make. The turn 19 victory point has always been hard. Sometimes I've lost at the turn 17. And sometimes I squeak by with the turn 19. But I have never seen a massive Union victory. In fact, this I think was far and away the best I've ever seen the Union do. I'm not even sure they ever won in a game I've played. Certainly nothing I played opposed. But there you have it. Overall, yeah, it's a classic. It's not a perfect game, but it's one of the top war games that I've ever seen. It's on an interesting subject matter to me, to a lot of people, and I would say this is essentially your gold standard. If you want to do a Civil War game, you have to match this. For the People probably comes close, but I can't tell after one play. Alrighty.